In Oak Ridge, the silence between neighbors wasn't the kind that came from peace. It was the kind built over decades, stacked brick by brick, year by year, out of old grudges and quiet resentments that nobody had ever bothered to put down. The fences here weren't just wood and wire. They were decisions. They were declarations. They told you everything you needed to know about the people who built them without a single word ever being exchanged. Nobody believed the answer to all that bitterness was buried in a vacant lot at the end of Sycamore Lane, hidden inside a handful of ancient seeds that a woman named Mrs. Lisa Benson had carried wrapped in a cloth since the day her mother died. While the neighborhood watched and waited for her doomed garden to fail, she kept a botanical secret so old it had nearly been forgotten by the world. What grew from that cracked, sun-beaten soil didn't just survive. It changed everything. What bloomed there altered the fate of 2 families forever. And the final lesson it delivered left even the most hardened hearts without a single word left to say. If you believe that wisdom can heal what money never could, this story is for you. Sycamore Lane in the town of Oak Ridge, North Carolina, looked like a postcard from a distance. Red maples lined both sides of the street. The houses were old, but kept. Porches with rocking chairs, window boxes that still held the ghost shapes of flowers someone had planted long ago and never replanted. From the road, you might have thought it was the kind of street where people left pies on each other's doorsteps and watched each other's kids. You would have been wrong. Up close, the lane had a different texture entirely. The lawns on either side of the lot at number 14 were separated not just by property lines, but by a 6-foot cedar fence that had been extended, re-extended, and fortified over the years, until it ran the full length of both properties like a spine. The wood had gone grey from weather, but nobody had let it fall. Both sides kept it standing. That said everything. The vacant lot between the 2 houses had sat empty for 11 years. The city had mowed it twice a year, done nothing else, and left the rest to the heat and the weeds. Ragweed grew there in August. Crabgrass crawled across the cracked clay soil like something trying to escape. A rusted basketball hoop leaned at the far end at a 40-degree angle, still wearing the ghost of a net that had long since turned to threads. Nobody wanted that lot. Nobody wanted to be responsible for it. And nobody, in 11 years, had done a single thing with it. Until Lisa Benson. Lisa had lived at 12 Sycamore Lane for 31 years. She had moved in as a young woman with her husband David and a station wagon full of cardboard boxes, back when the lane still had the energy of a place on its way up. David had passed 8 years ago, a heart attack on a Tuesday morning, so sudden it hadn't even had time to feel real until 3 days later, when she reached for his coffee mug out of habit and caught herself. She was 64 now. Her hair had gone the color of good pewter. Her hands were lined from years of working soil. She was not a woman who announced herself. She didn't wave from the porch the way her mother had, didn't call over the fence, didn't bring welcome baskets to people who moved in. But she noticed everything. She noticed the exact angle at which the light hit the east side of the vacant lot at 7 in the morning in early May, and she had been noticing it for years. The cedar fence to her left, the one that marked the boundary between her property and the vacant lot, was nothing compared to the structure on the other side of that lot. At number 16, the Hartley family had built something closer to a wall. Raymond Hartley was 68 years old and had the disposition of a man who had decided at some point in his 50s that he was done giving the world the benefit of the doubt. He was a retired civil engineer, meticulous, exacting, and possessed of a memory that held grievances the way a cast-iron pan holds heat. Long after the fire was gone, the surface was still dangerous to touch. His wife Carol was quieter, gentler, the kind of woman who apologized for things that weren't her fault. Their son Marcus was grown and lived in Charlotte. He called on Sundays and visited at Thanksgiving, and had long since made peace with the fact that his father's relationship with the neighbor situation was a permanent feature of the landscape, like the ridgeline behind the house, or the particular creak of the third porch step. The fence at number 16 was 8 feet tall. It was cedar too, but newer, pressure-treated, and painted a dark charcoal gray. Raymond had added a lattice extension 2 years ago that technically violated the town ordinance by 4 inches, and he knew it, and he did not care even slightly. He had documentation. He had a binder. The trouble between the Bensons and the Hartleys was old enough that the people who started it were mostly gone now, which was the particular cruelty of long-running neighborhood disputes. They outlived their own origins. The original argument had been about a property survey. David Benson had commissioned one in 1987 to settle a disagreement about the shared driveway easement. The surveyor had placed the line slightly differently than the Hartleys expected. 3 feet. That was it. 3 feet of gravel driveway that Raymond Hartley had been parking on for 2 years before anyone measured it. David Benson had not been unkind about it. He had shown Raymond the survey, offered to split the cost of a second opinion, suggested they simply mark it and move on. Raymond Hartley had not moved on. The second opinion confirmed the first. Raymond Hartley did not accept the second opinion. There had been a conversation in the driveway that neither of their wives had witnessed, but that both had heard clearly through the kitchen windows, and after that, the fence went up. That had been 37 years ago. David was 8 years in the ground. The survey was framed in a box in Raymond's basement, and the fence was still standing. Lisa Benson stood at her kitchen window on the morning of April 3rd and looked at the vacant lot for a long time. She held her coffee with both hands the way she always did when she was thinking hard about something. The early light was coming in from the east at exactly the angle she had been watching for years, falling across the clay soil in a way that told her what she had always suspected. It was good ground, neglected, starved, compacted, but good. She set her mug down, went to the closet in the back bedroom, and took down the tin box from the top shelf. It was old, the lid painted with blue flowers that had almost entirely worn away. Her mother had given it to her 20 years ago with no ceremony. Just pressed it into her hands and said, "These are not for looking at, Lisa. You'll know when." Inside, wrapped in a square of faded blue cotton, were the seeds. She carried them to the kitchen table and sat with them for a while. Then she put on her gardening shoes and went outside. Mrs. Lisa Benson knew that before you could harvest something new, you had to prepare the ground first. If you're someone who believes the world needs more stories that bring light instead of noise, I want to invite you to plant a seed right here on this channel. Subscribing is your way of saying you value this kind of wisdom, the kind that money can't buy. Hit that button now, and let's grow something together. She applied to the town planning office the following. The vacant lot at number 14 Sycamore Lane was technically owned by the municipality, but the town had a community garden program that allowed residents to lease unused parcel for a nominal annual fee, $12, provided they maintained them and kept them free of debris. The woman at the counter looked at the address, then at Lisa, then back at the address. That lot, that lot. The paperwork took 9 days. She got her permit on a Tuesday and started turning soil the following Saturday. She did not ask the Hartleys. She did not announce herself. She got up at 6 in the morning with a spade and a wheelbarrow and she went to work. The neighbors noticed within 48 hours. Oak Ridge was that kind of street. Deb Kowalski from number 9 stood at the end of her driveway with a cup of coffee and watched Lisa work for a full 10 minutes without saying anything. Then she called across the street. "What are you putting in over there, Lisa?" "Garden," Lisa called back without looking up. Deb considered this. "In that lot?" "Yes." Deb went inside. By that evening, the news had traveled the length of Sycamore Lane and doubled back. Raymond Hartley heard about it from his neighbor on the other side, Phil Drummond, who told him while they were both getting their mail. Phil said it in the careful, neutral way of someone delivering information they suspect will land badly, watching Raymond's face for the reaction. Raymond's face didn't change much. It rarely did. He said, and took his mail inside and stood at his kitchen window for a long time looking out at the lot. Carol came and stood beside him. She didn't say anything either for a moment. Then, "She got the permit, Raymond. It's her right." "I know it's her right," Raymond said. He watched Lisa work for another minute. She was turning the soil methodically, row by row, the way someone works who has done this before and has no interest in rushing. There was something about the steadiness of it that annoyed him in a way he couldn't quite articulate. "That soil is garbage," he finally said. "Clay and rock. Nothing's going to grow there." Carol looked at the side of his face. "Maybe not," she said, and went back to making dinner. The first strange thing people noticed was the seeds. Lisa didn't go to the hardware store. She didn't order from a catalog. She planted what was in the tin box. And what was in the tin box was unlike anything anyone on Sycamore Lane had ever seen. The seeds were odd shapes and sizes, some flat and papery like dried citrus peel, some round and dark as river stones, some elongated and ridged, one variety that looked almost like a tiny curled fist. Deb Kowalski's daughter Emma, who was 12 and had a habit of appearing wherever something interesting was happening, crouched at the edge of the lot one afternoon and watched Lisa press the seeds into the prepared rows. "What kind are those?" Emma asked, pointing at the flat papery ones. "Old kind," Lisa said. "Like heirloom?" Lisa smiled without looking up. "Older than that." She planted in the early morning and again just before sundown, never at midday. She watered by hand with a copper watering can, not the hose. She spoke to the rows, not loudly, not in any way that was meant to be heard. Just a low murmur as she moved along, the way you might talk to yourself while you work. Raymond Hartley saw her from his upstairs window one evening, moving down the rows in the last of the light, and something about it unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. He pulled the blind. The mocking started gently, the way these things always do. Phil Drummond made a joke at the hardware store about Lisa Benson's miracle garden and got a laugh from the men around the register. Someone on the neighborhood Facebook group posted a photo of the lot, the dark-turned soil, the little mounded rows, with the caption, "Place your bets." The comments filled up quickly. Most were good-natured. A few were not. Raymond did not comment. He didn't need to. He had already said what he thought to Carol over dinner, that ground had been compacted for over a decade. The pH was almost certainly wrong. There was no irrigation, and the woman was planting mystery seeds in clay soil in early April when the frost date hadn't even passed. He said it the way he said most things, evenly, factually, as though he were reading from a report. Carol listened and said nothing, and passed him the bread. Marcus called that Sunday from Charlotte, and Raymond mentioned it. "She's planting a garden next door," Marcus said. "In the vacant lot." "Yes." "Huh." A pause. "Good for her." Raymond did not respond to that. The frost came on April 19th. It was not a killing frost. 3 days of temperatures in the upper 20s overnight, the kind that glazes the puddles in the morning but doesn't crack the ground. It was enough, though. It was enough for the Facebook group to revive the conversation, enough for Phil to make another joke, enough for Raymond Hartley to stand at his kitchen window at 6 a.m. and study the silvered rose with an expression that might have been satisfaction, or might have been something else entirely, something he would not have named even if asked. He expected to see brown, collapsed stems, the soft wreckage of things that had tried and failed. The rows were untouched. He pressed closer to the glass. The soil was frost-rimed, but the tiny shoots that had pushed up over the last 2 weeks, thin as thread, pale green, were standing exactly as they had been. He could see them from here, each one upright, holding. He stood there for a long time. Then he went and made his coffee and didn't look out the window again. By early May, the shoots were 2 inches tall and still nobody could identify them. Emma Kowalski had photographed them and run them through 3 different plant identification apps. 2 of them returned no result. The third said, possibly a member of the Apiaceae family, with a confidence rating of 31%, which Emma correctly understood to mean the app was guessing. Lisa Benson was not forthcoming. She was polite when people asked. She smiled and she said, "You'll see," but she offered nothing more than that. The mystery had begun to take on a life of its own. Someone suggested she was growing medicinal herbs. Someone else suggested they were invasive and that the town should be notified. That post got a lot of comments before Deb Kowalski replied that the woman had a permit and maybe people should wait and see. Raymond Hartley read every comment. He said nothing on the thread, but he had started checking the lot from the window first thing every morning, a habit he was not willing to examine too closely. The drought came in June. Not the gradual kind that sneaks up on you. The sudden kind. The kind that arrives with a week of 90-degree days and a sky the color of old bone, and just stays. The town issued a voluntary water restriction. The lawn services stopped their weekly runs. Everything on Sycamore Lane went a little brown around the edges, the way things do when the heat gets serious. The vacant lot got the worst of it. The clay soil cracked in hexagonal patterns. The ground looked like something from a different landscape entirely. Arid, alien, a surface that had forgotten the concept of rain. People drove past slowly. They looked. The plants in Lisa Benson's rows curled at the edges, the way all plants do when they're thirsty. They looked thin and provisional, held together by very little. Raymond Hartley checked the lot from his window on the morning of June 14th and felt, uncomfortably, that he had been right all along. He went to the lot that afternoon, walked over to it for the first time since Lisa had started planting. He wasn't going to say anything to her. She wasn't there. He just walked the length of it slowly, looking at the rows. And what he saw confirmed what he'd told Carol. The ground was almost entirely without moisture. The plants were still alive, technically, but they were hanging on by threads. He went back inside and did not tell Carol he had gone over. That night, the forecast showed no rain for 12 days. On the neighborhood group, someone posted, "Sad about the garden. Figured this would happen." This time, there were more replies that agreed. On the morning of June 22nd, Raymond Hartley opened his kitchen blind and stood very still. The garden was not dead. He went through the facts methodically, the way he approached everything. 12 days without rain, temperatures consistently in the low 90s, no irrigation system, clay soil. Every variable pointed to one outcome. He had made a kind of private peace with that outcome. He had been, if he was honest with himself, ready for it. The plants were not only alive, they were taller. They had doubled in height during the drought. The stems had gone from pale green to a deep shore green that had no business being there given the conditions. The leaves had opened wide and flat, and from some of them, the ones in the back 2 rows, something was emerging. Not quite a flower yet. A bud, dense and closed, the color of old gold. He stood at the window long enough that Carol came and stood beside him. "Oh," she said quietly. He didn't answer. The neighborhood discovered the garden's survival, the way neighborhoods discover things, all at once, because someone posted a photo. Emma Kowalski had taken it on her way to school. The rows of deep green against the cracked gray clay, the light hitting the emerging buds in a way that made the whole composition look almost planned. The photo got more comments than anything on the group in months. People started walking past the lot on purpose, slowly, the way you slow down when you see something that doesn't match your expectations. Lisa Benson was there most mornings, still working the way she always had, methodically, quietly, no fanfare. She still watered by hand. She still talked low to the rows. She didn't seem to notice or care about the attention, which only increased it. The buds opened on July 3rd. There was no dramatic announcement. Lisa didn't call anyone over. She was just there at 6 a.m. when it happened, crouched at the end of the back row, and she stayed very still for a long time, looking. The flowers were unlike anything that grew in Oak Ridge, or likely anywhere nearby. They were multi-layered, the outer petals a deep burnished amber that shifted toward copper in direct light. The inner petals a pale cream with fine veins of violet running through them like rivers seen from altitude. They bloomed in clusters of 7, always 7, with a symmetry so precise it looked almost engineered. The scent reached Sycamore Lane before people reached the lot. It arrived on the morning air the way good music arrives. You heard it before you were aware of hearing it, registered it somewhere below conscious thought, and then stopped what you were doing and tried to understand what had just changed. It was layered, something warm underneath, like sun-baked cedar, and above it something lighter and stranger, green and clean, the way the air smells after lightning, but softer. It had no exact match in anyone's memory. By 8 a.m., 4 people had come out of their houses and walked to the lot without entirely knowing why. Deb Kowalski stood at the edge of the lot and looked at the flowers for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "Lisa, what are these?" "My mother called them by a name in Greek," Lisa said, not looking up. "There isn't really an English equivalent. Where did she get them?" "Her mother gave them to her, and her mother before that." She paused, pressing her palm gently against the soil. "They're very old. Most people don't know them anymore." Raymond Hartley smelled the flowers from his upstairs window on the morning of July 5th. He had the window open for the first time in weeks. The heat had broken slightly overnight, and he was getting dressed when it reached him. He stopped in the middle of pulling on his shirt and stood there with it half on, breathing. He went to the window and looked out at the lot. From this angle he could see the full rows, the amber clusters catching the early light, the whole geometry of what Lisa Benson had done with 11 years' worth of neglected municipal ground. He stood at the window for a long time. When he came downstairs, Carol was already at the kitchen window. "That smell," she said. "I know," he said. They stood together for a moment. Then Raymond poured his coffee and took it to his chair, and opened the newspaper, and did not go near the window again until evening. The first crossing of the line happened on July 9th, and it was not Raymond, it was Carol. She had a migraine that had been building for 3 days, the kind that settled behind her left eye and turned the light into something cruel. She had taken everything in the medicine cabinet. Nothing had reached it. She was sitting in the back sunroom with the blinds mostly shut, holding very still, when the scent from the garden came through the screen on the breeze. She didn't make a decision. She was in too much pain for decisions. She just found herself standing up, and then walking through the back door, and then standing at the wooden gate that separated her property from the vacant lot. Lisa Benson was there, tying up a stake at the far end of the row. Carol stood at the gate for a moment. Lisa looked up. "I'm sorry," Carol said. Her voice was tight from the pain. "I don't mean to intrude." Lisa straightened. She looked at Carol for a moment, reading something. Then she said simply, "Come in." Carol Hartley sat on the overturned bucket that Lisa kept at the edge of the rows. Lisa said nothing for a while, just continued working. The scent was stronger in here, inside the space of the garden. It moved around Carol like something warm. After about 20 minutes, Carol realized her shoulders had come down from where they'd been, raised near her ears, the way the body holds pain. She pressed 2 fingers against the spot above her left eyebrow where the migraine lived. It was quieter, not gone, but quieter. She looked at the flowers. "My mother used to brew a tea," Lisa said, without being asked, still moving along the row. "The petals, with spring water and a little raw honey. She swore by it for headaches." She paused. "I can bring you some tomorrow if you'd like." Carol Hartley looked at the back of Lisa Benson's house. Then she looked at the amber flowers. Then she said, "I'd like that very much. Thank you." She stayed in the garden another half hour. When she went back inside, the migraine had retreated to something she could live with. She did not tell Raymond where she had been. Not that evening. Raymond found out 3 days later. Carol told him herself, matter-of-factly, over breakfast, in the same tone she used to report ordinary things. She said she had gone into the garden. She said Lisa Benson had been kind. She said the tea had helped her migraine. Raymond held his coffee mug with both hands and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "You went over there?" "Yes, Carol." "Raymond." She said it the same way he had said her name, flat and level, nothing in it but the word. "She is our neighbor." "She has been our neighbor for 31 years. David Benson is 8 years gone, and I have never once been to that woman's door." She paused. "I went to her garden." He looked out the window. The amber flowers were visible from where he sat. "She gave you tea," he said finally. "She grew the flowers herself," Carol said. "She carried those seeds in a tin box for 20 years. Her mother gave them to her." She stood up and took her plate to the sink. "I think that's worth more than a property line, Raymond. I think it always was." He didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. The second thing happened on July 17th, and it was neither expected nor planned. Raymond Hartley came home from his afternoon walk to find one of the back rows of the garden flattened. A summer storm had come through fast while he was out, one of those 20-minute storms that arrive without warning and leave as quickly, and the wind had hit the taller stalks in the back section at an angle that drove them sideways. 3 rows of the amber flowers were bent against the soil. He stood at his back gate and looked at the damage. Then he looked at Lisa Benson's house. Her car was gone. He stood there for a moment. He went to his shed and got a set of bamboo stakes and the roll of soft garden twine he'd used on his tomatoes last summer. He let himself through the gate, and he walked to the flattened rows, and he got down on his knees in the wet soil, and he started staking. He was methodical. He worked row by row, setting each stake at the right depth, tying the twine at the right height, not too tight, enough support without cutting into the stem. He had done this kind of work before, years ago, before the dispute, before the fence. He had forgotten that his hands knew how. He was on the 3rd row when he heard the car pull into the driveway next door. He kept working. He heard the car door. He heard footsteps. He did not look up. Lisa Benson came to the edge of her property and stopped. She looked at him for a moment. He could feel her looking. "Storm took them," he said, without turning around. A long pause. "I see that," Lisa said. He tied off a stake and moved to the next one. "I've done this before," he said. "You need the stake on the windward side if you don't want them going over again." Another pause. Then he heard her footsteps, not retreating, but approaching. She crouched on the other side of the row, picked up the remaining stakes, and began working the far end toward him. They worked without talking for a while. The garden smelled of rain and copper and the particular warm cedar scent of the flowers. The evening light came in flat and orange. When they met in the middle of the row, Raymond sat back on his heels and looked at what they'd done. The stalks were upright, every one of them. He didn't look at Lisa directly, but he said, "They're good plants." Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then, "They are." Another silence. Not the old kind, not the silence of the fence, loaded and defended. A different kind. "My mother's family was from a small town outside Athens," Lisa said. "These seeds have been in my family for over 150 years. My great-great-grandmother grew them in a courtyard garden. She believed," she paused considering, "she believed they had a kind of intelligence, that they could feel the difference between a place that was at war and a place that was at peace. She said they grew better in peace." Raymond looked at the rose. "That's not," he started and then stopped. He had been about to say that's not scientifically sound, and he was aware, even as the words formed, that the moment did not call for that. He looked at the flowers instead. "They survived everything," he said finally. "The frost, the drought." "They did," Lisa said. She was quiet for a moment. "I think they were waiting for the right conditions." He didn't ask what she meant. He thought he understood. The secret itself, the full botanical secret that Lisa had been holding since her mother put the tin in her hands, came out in pieces over the following 2 weeks, as Sycamore Lane gathered around the garden in the way that communities gather when something good has grown in an unexpected place. The seeds were from a variety of flowering plant that had been cultivated in the Greek islands for centuries. Botanists had a Latin name for the genus, but the family name, passed down through Lisa's line, was untranslatable, something that meant roughly the plant that remembers where it came from. It had properties that modern herbalists had only recently begun to document. The flowers produced compounds that, through scent alone, reduced cortisol levels in nearby humans. They had been used historically in places of conflict, courtyards between feuding families, common gardens in divided villages, not as a cure, but as a softening, a way of making people more available to each other. The secret was not magic. It was older than magic. It was agriculture, and it was chemistry, and it was the knowledge passed from hand to hand over 150 years by women who understood that the earth, given the right conditions, would do the work that people could not always do for themselves. The real secret, the one Lisa Benson had known from the morning she stood at the kitchen window with both hands around her coffee mug, was simpler than any of that. It was this: the seeds only reached their full potential when planted in ground that two people prepared together. Her mother had told her this. Her mother's mother had told her. You could plant them alone. Lisa had done exactly that. But to unlock the full bloom, the final layer of the flower's expression, required the work of two sets of hands in the same soil. She had been waiting, without knowing exactly what she was waiting for the second pair of hands. She told Raymond this on a Thursday evening when they were both in the garden, as they had taken to being in the late afternoons, by a kind of unspoken agreement that had grown out of the staking incident like something that had been trying to grow all along. Raymond was quiet for a while. Then he said, "So we did it already." "We did it already," Lisa confirmed. He looked at the flowers. The amber clusters had deepened in color over the past 2 weeks. They were darker now, closer to bronze, and in the center of each cluster, something new had opened. A tiny inner flower, white, with a core the color of deep gold. "I didn't know I was doing it," he said. "That's usually how it works," Lisa said. He was quiet again for a long moment. Then, "The survey, in 87. Yes, David came to me in good faith." "He did." Raymond looked at the cedar fence, his fence, the one he had built and extended and maintained for 37 years, a monument to 3 feet of gravel driveway, and a wound he'd kept open long past the point of any reason. He looked at it for a long time. "I know," he said. That was all. But the way he said it, not as a concession, not as a defeat, but as something he had simply, finally, set down, was enough. The fence came down on August 14th. Not all of it. Not the section that separated Raymond's property from the lane. That stayed. But the section that ran along the vacant lot, the section that had divided number 16 from the garden, came down on a Saturday morning when Raymond brought out a reciprocating saw and Carol brought out 2 glasses of lemonade and Lisa stood at her gate and watched. It took 4 hours. Marcus drove up from Charlotte. He hadn't been told exactly what was happening, just that his father needed help with a fence project. And when he arrived and understood, he stood very still for a moment and then picked up a panel and carried it to the truck bed without saying a word. The garden, once the fence was gone, spread visually across both properties, though nothing had physically changed. The light moved differently across it. The scent reached further. Deb Kowalski came over with her daughter Emma and a fruit salad. Phil Drummond came and stood with his hands in his pockets and didn't say much, but he stayed 2 hours. The woman from number 22, whose name was Yvonne, which most of them realized they had never actually known, brought cornbread and stayed until the sun went down. Sycamore Lane ate together in Lisa Benson's garden on the evening of August 14th, and the smell of the bronze and amber flowers moved over all of them in the warm end of summer air, and it did not fix everything that was broken between people, because nothing does that all at once. But it moved through the air like a question that was also an invitation. What if you put it down? What if this was the moment you simply put it down? Some of them heard it. Some of them would hear it later, in memory, weeks after that evening, at some ordinary moment, over breakfast or driving to work, and would stop and think about that garden and the woman who had planted it and what had grown from the strangest and most unlikely ground. Oak Ridge was not transformed overnight. That is not how communities work, and it would be dishonest to tell it that way. What happened was slower and more real than transformation. It was something more like thawing, the gradual release of something that had been held rigid for too long. Conversations that had never happened began happening. Property lines that had been weapons were renegotiated quietly, without attorneys. People learned each other's names, full names, the ones nobody had gotten around to using. Raymond Hartley did not become someone unrecognizable to himself. He remained meticulous, exacting, possessed of a memory that held onto things longer than was probably useful. But he came to the garden in the late afternoons, and he learned the names of the plants, and he was precise and careful about it in the way he was precise about everything. And that precision, applied to something growing rather than something defended, looked entirely different on him. He and Lisa Benson never became close friends in the easy way. They became something older and more durable than that. Neighbors, in the original meaning of the word. People who shared ground, who knew each other's names not because they had been introduced, but because they had worked the same soil. The tin box sat on Lisa's kitchen table now, open, the faded blue flower lid beside it. The seeds she kept there were from the second generation, harvested from the garden's first full season and cleaned and dried the way her mother had taught her. She had already given a packet to Deb Kowalski. She had given one to Emma, who was 14 now and had started keeping a plant journal. She was saving one packet in particular. She didn't know who it was for yet. She trusted she would know, when the time came, the same way she had known everything else about that garden. Not in advance, but in the moment, when the ground was ready. There is a particular kind of wisdom that does not come in books, though books have tried to hold it. It does not come with credentials, or with money, or with the right equipment or the right connections. It comes through hands, passed from one set to another, wrapped in cloth, carried in tin boxes, planted in the worst possible conditions at the most unlikely moments by people who believed, against all visible evidence, that something could grow. The vacant lot at 14 Sycamore Lane is not vacant anymore. It is not Instagram perfect. It is not symmetrical. The rows are not quite straight because 2 different people worked them, and 2 different people never work exactly the same line. The cedar fence posts are still visible along one edge, stripped of their boards, the wood going silver in the weather, a kind of memorial, or maybe just a record. Something stood here once, and was put down. The bronze flowers bloom from late June through September now. The scent carries 3 houses in either direction on a still morning. People slow down when they pass. Some of them stop. Lisa Benson is usually there when they stop. She doesn't explain very much. She crouches in the rows and she answers the questions she can answer. And for the ones she can't, for the question underneath all the questions, which is something like, how did you know this would work? She does what her mother did, which is press a small paper packet into a stranger's hand and say simply, you'll know when. If you believed that wisdom could heal what money never could, that the most important things are the ones that get passed hand to hand, carried in tin boxes, planted in broken ground, then this story was always for you. The same way Mrs. Lisa Benson knew, standing at her kitchen window on that April morning, that the light was right, that the ground, neglected as it was still good. Some things survive everything. Some things are waiting for the right conditions. And sometimes, the seed that changes everything has been in your hands your whole life. You just needed to know when. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.